Brain, the mass of nerve tissue in the anterior end of an organism. The brain integrates sensory information and directs motor responses. In higher vertebrates, it is also the center of learning. The human brain weighs approximately 1.4 kilograms or 3 pounds and is made up of billions of cells called neurons. Junctions between neurons, known as synapses, enable electrical and chemical messages to be transmitted from one neuron to the next in the brain, a process that underlies basic sensory functions and that is critical to learning, memory and thought formation, and other cognitive activities. The brain and the spinal cord together make up the system of nerve tissue in vertebrates called the central nervous system, which controls both voluntary movements, such as those involved in walking and in speech, and involuntary movements, such as breathing and reflex actions. It also is the center of emotion and cognition. For more information about the human brain, see Nervous system of human. In lower vertebrates, the brain is tubular and resembles an early developmental stage of the brain in higher vertebrates. It consists of three distinct regions: the hindbrain, the midbrain, and the forebrain. Although the brain of higher vertebrates undergoes considerable modification during embryonic development, these three regions are still discernible. The hindbrain is composed of the medulla oblongata and the pons. The medulla transmits signals between the spinal cord and the higher parts of the brain. It also controls such autonomic functions as heartbeat and respiration. The pons is partly made up of tracts connecting the spinal cord with higher brain levels, and it also contains cell groups that transfer information from the cerebrum to the cerebellum. The midbrain, the upper portion of which evolved from the optic lobes, is the main center of sensory integration in fish and amphibians. It also is involved with integration in reptiles and birds. In mammals, the midbrain is greatly reduced, serving primarily as a connecting link between the hindbrain and the forebrain. Connected to the medulla, pons, and midbrain by large bundles of fibers is the cerebellum. Relatively large in humans, this little brain controls balance and coordination by producing smooth, coordinated movements of muscle groups. The forebrain includes the cerebral hemispheres and, under these, the brainstem, which contains the thalamus and hypothalamus. The thalamus is the main relay center between the medulla and the cerebrum. The hypothalamus is an important control center for sex drive, pleasure, pain, hunger, thirst, blood pressure, body temperature, and other visceral functions. The hypothalamus produces hormones that control the secretions of the anterior pituitary gland, and it also produces oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone, which are stored in and released by the posterior pituitary gland. The cerebrum, originally functioning as part of the olfactory lobes, is involved with the more complex functions of the human brain. In humans and other advanced vertebrates, the cerebrum has grown over the rest of the brain, forming a convoluted, wrinkled layer of gray matter. The degree of convolution is partly dependent on the size of the body. Small mammals, example, lesser anteater, marmoset, generally have smooth brains, and large mammals, example, whale, elephant, dolphin, generally have highly convoluted ones. The cerebral hemispheres are separated by a deep groove, the longitudinal cerebral fissure. At the base of this fissure lies a thick bundle of nerve fibers, called the corpus callosum, which provides a communication link between the hemispheres. The left hemisphere controls the right half of the body, and vice versa, because of a crossing of the nerve fibers in the medulla or, less commonly, in the spinal cord. Although the right and left hemispheres are mirror images of one another in many ways, there are important functional distinctions. In most people, for example, the areas that control speech are located in the left hemisphere, while areas that control spatial perceptions are located in the right hemisphere. Two major furrows, the central sulcus and the lateral sulcus, divide each cerebral hemisphere into four sections: the frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital lobes. The central sulcus, also known as the fissure of Rolando, also separates the cortical motor area, which is anterior to the fissure, from the cortical sensory area, which is posterior to the fissure. Starting from the top of the hemisphere, the upper regions of the motor and sensory areas control the lower parts of the body, and the lower regions of the motor and sensory areas control the upper parts of the body. Other functional areas of the cerebral hemispheres have been identified, including the visual cortex in the occipital lobe and the auditory cortex in the temporal lobe. A large amount of the primate cortex, however, is devoted to no specific motor or sensory function. This so-called association cortex is apparently involved in higher mental activities.